mean, again, this is what I was alluding to before, where, you know, right now our mainstream media in the West, the United States, is focused on Netanyahu's speech. It will be a footnote in history. When the eventual book is written about this time, his speech will literally just be a footnote because it's meaningless. It's, I got to watch my language. I'm very angry right now, so I have to be very careful because I can immediately go into Marine Corps mode and use language that probably isn't appropriate. So
these are infuriating times, but continue.
His words are meaningless words. It's just hot air coming out of his mouth. It's infuriating, but what historians will reflect on is this. Israel said that they will not do business with Hamas. That's one of their red lines, and I understand. That's even though I don't support the Israeli government, if I'm being honest as a mediator, that's a tough one to swallow. Tell Israel, no, you got to sit down at the table with Hamas. What China did is there's no more Hamas. I mean, it exists, but China has created this fusion entity that now has legitimacy, that will be able to sit down and negotiate. And Israel has no choice now. No choice. Israel can't say that's Hamas. It's not Hamas. It's something different. Hamas is part of it. This was a brilliant act of diplomacy by China. I should point out that I think Russia actually initiated this effort. They brought Hamas and the PLA into Moscow to have the discussions. This is part of that collusion taking place between Russia and China about what a multipolar world should look like, which is a world that seeks peaceful resolutions to some of the most difficult problems. Remember, it was Russia, again, initiating dialogue, China closing the deal on the normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is a fundamental game changer. Both those nations now are going to be sitting at the BRICS table, unimaginable 5 years ago, to talk about that. That happened. Now Russia and China have created the conditions where Israel will have to sit down with this fusion element and do business with them. They can't say that's Hamas. This is the genius of what has happened here, and people need to be talking about that. But there's another aspect of it too, because Russia, I always advise people. You both know who Ray McGovern is, right? Dan, you've met Ray McGovern?
Yes. Yes, he's been on the show.
I know he's been on the show. Ray McGovern, first of all, he's just a hell of a nice guy. I mean, you can't help but love Ray McGovern. He's literally, every man's grandpa. The grandpa you just dreamed of having, because he's that good of a guy. But he's a man who used to be a CIA analyst. Back in the day, when I worked with the CIA, I was never in the CIA, but when I worked with them, we called the Soviet branch SOVA, Soviet Affairs, and that was the the brain of all Soviet-related analysis. He predates the Soviet affairs, so he's before SOVA. I made the mistake once of saying, "Oh, Ray was with SOVA," and he called me up and said, "Scott, I'm before SOVA." That's how old he is. But Ray taught me a couple things. He said, stop distrusting Russian media and the statements made by Russian politicians, because it's a carryover from Soviet times where, we had Sovietologists who would literally look at photographs and look at how close people are standing to whom to determine what the power structure is in the Politburo. Oh my God, Kosygin's wearing a fur hat and he's 4.6 inches from Brezhnev. The world is coming to an end, kind of thing. And he said, no, all you have to do is read the Soviet press. Read the statements made. Listen to the speeches. They're not lying. They get up there and they say something because that's what they're going to do. Putin is one of the most transparent leaders out there. He meets all the time with the governors, with his own cabinet, and the minutes of these meetings are published. You can watch it on YouTube. You can read it if you have the patience to do this. I'm a specialist in this, so this is what I do for a living. That's why I'm pretty boring. But the fact of the matter is, Putin has said some things like America and Europe gave Ukraine weapons that they then used to attack Russia, and there will be a price to pay. We are holding you accountable, and we will pay the price. Now, immediately people jumped on that and said, "Oh my God, Russia's going to hit American forces." Russia's not that crude or crass. And they came out and they said, "No, it'll be an asymmetric response." Which means they're going to come at it different. And then later on he said what that means. We're going to provide weapons to the enemies of the United States and Europe so that those weapons can be used to attack the United States and Europe. That's what's going to happen. And we will pick the time and place. I believe, because right after Israel struck Yemen in retaliation for the Houthi drone strike on Tel Aviv, I think Lavrov, who's chairing the Security Council right now, said that Russia will not sit on the sidelines forever, that Russia is going to get involved. I think Russia has gotten involved. Russia just finalized a very detailed defense agreement with Iran, and I believe there's classified annexes to that. And I think one of the classified annexes deal with the transfer of Russian military equipment to Iran with the intention of Iran transferring it to Yemen, to the Houthi. Why? Well, Russia shouldn't be landing IL-76s in Sana'a airport. That's not asymmetric. That's in your face. Iran already has a very efficient logistics system set up where they are transferring weapons to Yemen. So Iran will continue that, but now the weapons are going to be more modern. They're going to be weapons that can sink U.S. naval vessels in the Red Sea. If they get the Onyx anti-ship missile system, that's a certainty. And they're going to get missiles that can strike Israel without being shot down. And this is the escalation. This is what Russia promised to do. So this is the other side of the coin. On the one hand, you have genius diplomacy taking place that sets the condition for peace. But on the other hand, you have realpolitik, where the Russians are going to follow through, because Ray McGovern told me, when Russia says something, take it to the bank, are going to follow through with the asymmetric warfare. They're going to provide these weapons to Yemen through a proxy, Iran, and those weapons will be used to great effect against Israel and the United States. The gloves are off. You don't get to fire ATACMS missiles at Crimea and kill vacationers on a Sevastopol beach without there being repercussions. And the repercussions will be a heavily armed Yemen. And what is Israel going to do? Bomb Yemen? Get in line, man. The Saudis have been doing it since 2014. America and the British tried to do it, couldn't accomplish the objective. The Yemeni have just gotten stronger, gotten better. And that's what people are going to be writing about, not Benjamin Netanyahu's pathetic little charade of a speech in front of the U.S. Congress, the disgrace of the U.S. Congress. They're going to be talking about the diplomacy of Russia and China and the asymmetric warfare that's going to break the back of Israel and the United States in the region. And, I'm not happy about this. I just have to be honest. I'm an American, and I don't want American sailors to die. I don't want American soldiers to die or airmen to die. I want them to get the hell out of that region and come home and live. But we don't have politicians that think sanely. We don't have military officials that understand the limits of power, and we're going to end up sailing ships into harm's way. And we're going to lose these ships, and we're going to lose Americans, and it's going to break my heart. But it is the inevitable the inevitable consequence of empirical overreach. America is trying to do too much with too little, with no international support, and most importantly, no legitimacy. We lack legitimacy of purpose in everything we do in the Middle East today.
Yeah, Dan, I want to give you actually the final comment on this before we move on, because I'd like to hear your assessment, not just of what Scott said, but also given these developments, adding in the fact that Russia has promised, and this was a while ago, this was when the United States and NATO, everyone was coming in and saying, we're going to allow Ukraine to use our weapons to strike deep into Russian territory. Russia said, okay, well, we're going to start arming your adversaries because that is what you would call an eye for an eye. That's the proper response. So can you talk about in the context of this, especially with Yemen? Yemen just landed a pretty big hit on Tel Aviv, a very embarrassing one, and now they could very well find themselves even more heavily armed and even more impressively armed than they already have been, which, you know, not only do they have friends in the Axis of Resistance, but they also have, you know, they're not a stranger to government. They do have a military. They do have access to their own government, as beleaguered as it's been by a U.S.-Saudi invasion. So your final word, Dan.
Yeah, no, first of all, cheers to Yemen. I mean, it's one of the poorest countries on earth. As Scott said, it's been a victim of a very brutal war since 2014, again, supported by the United States and Great Britain. Some believe that was a genocidal war as well, which also led to a famine in Yemen. And still, this very poor country, war-torn country, has crippled the shipping of the world in the Red Sea to support Gaza. They don't have to do that. They are sacrificing themselves to do that. And one can only applaud it, in my view. You know, the Genocide Convention of 1948 says that, you know, the nations of the world have an obligation to stop and prevent genocide when they see it. And Yemen is actually taking that seriously. It's one of the few countries that's actually physically doing something about it. But in terms of, you know, Russia and its statements about, you know, retaliating against the West through proxies, you know, the West, and the U.S. in particular, has had the luxury for basically its whole history of going to war with other countries without being attacked in return, right? Even when we lose tens of thousands of troops like we did in Vietnam, you never saw Vietnamese on the streets of New York City fighting us, right? But they could have. They would have had every right to do that, right? And, you know, it was inevitable at some point. You will reap what you sow. You cannot go to war with the rest of the world. You cannot support a war against Russia. As you said, support Ukraine to target civilians deep within Russia, to target Russia's radar defense systems that were designed not to defend against, you know, countries like Ukraine that are next door, but to defend against intercontinental ballistic missiles from the United States. You can't do that and expect forever not to be hit in return. And Americans are used to that, though. Americans, you know, are shocked to think that other countries would somehow strike back. But it will happen. And, you know, again, people cannot expect to go to war and have it a totally unilateral thing, which, again, the Americans have had for so long. And Americans need to start waking up that we have carried out these wars abroad, destroyed entire nations, destroyed civilizations, destroyed antiquities of the world, again, particularly in the Middle East. They have to wake up to that destruction, and that we, at some point, will feel, you know, the real repercussions of that. They're coming, and they're also coming economically.
Mây trắng hoa ban hoa mai rừng nở bừng muôn sắc xuân gửi thương vào câu ca, đem anh người khách lạ từ miền xuôi tới chơi nhà. Vậy nếu như anh có dịp thì mời anh ghé qua, ghé thăm nơi bản làng người Tây Bắc chúng em. Ống bên ngon lửa hồng, vò rượu cần chưa uống đã say. Miền dân cư chúng em yên bình nhưng lại đậm một chữ tình. Nếu như anh có dịp dừng đôi chân chút nha, ghé thăm phiên chợ tình cùng xe duyên chúng mình. Tiếng ca vang núi rừng nhịp nhàng từng câu hát thêm, mùa xuân tới có bao ngọt ngào trao tình nồng đến tràn. Chào một mùa xuân mới muôn hoa khoe sắc như đang đón mời. Mời chàng miền xuôi tới nơi quê hương Tây Bắc có em đón mời. Mời anh về miền Tây Bắc chúng em. Mời anh về miền Tây Bắc chúng em. Hòa vào làn sương mờ, hương theo làn mây trắng, hoa ban hoa mai rừng nơi buồn muôn sắc xuân. Miền vùng cao em đây mà, gửi thương vào câu ca, đem anh người khách lạ từ miền xuôi tới chơi nhà. Vậy nếu như anh có dịp thì mời anh ghé qua, ghé thăm nơi bản làng người Tây Bắc chúng em. Ống bên ngon lửa hồng, vò rượu cần chưa uống đã say. Miền dân cư chúng em yên bình nhưng lại đậm một chữ tình. Nếu như anh có dịp dừng đôi chân chút nha,